So, yeah, so you have a connection with Jessica and probably a connection with me too in a different way.
It's all those cousins, I tell you. Hey everybody, it's Morelle Inglefield. I'm the art director for Phoenix Magazine. Have you ever wondered what your family was like? The people who came before you, the people you've never met. Ever wondered what their days were like, how they survived, where they lived, where they were from? Well, this Saturday, March 13th, is Genealogy Day 2021. So I'm here at Coffee Rush in Chandler with genealogist Ian Lundy here and writer Jessica Dunham to talk about our genealogy and how you can find out your own family history.
To be honest, I hadn't given my genealogy much thought until I met Ian Lundy. A dear friend of mine married into his family, and I was at the wedding, and Ian and I actually bonded over a shared journalist kindred spirit. So we were talking about writing and storytelling and how much we love writing about other people's history and their stories. And that is when he told me that he is a certified genealogist and that this is something that you do professionally. And immediately I knew that I had to ask you at some point if you would be interested in doing my genealogy.
Yeah, well that's right, and I think to some extent, as I was explaining at the time, one profession, if you like, is an extension of the other. When we're working as journalists, we research and we have to stand up the story, otherwise we can't print it. And it's the same in genealogy. If you can't stand up the link, you're at a dead end.
When you were researching my family, you found that one of my ancestors is Robert Morris, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and you actually went out and bought this copy and gave it to me and told me all about Robert Morris.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about his history, because I really liked how you described sort of who he was during the American Revolution.
Yeah, he was a guy who came from England, came from Liverpool in England. He became very wealthy. He was a ship owner in Philadelphia, and at one time he was supposedly the richest man in the colonies. And he went into politics in Philadelphia, and he, just at the time of the revolution, he is said to have bankrolled the revolution. He's said to have paid for everything in Washington's army, down to uniforms, food for the men, every single thing. He bankrolled a lot. When it came to the vote on independence, Morris didn't think that the US could go alone. He thought that they still needed a connection with the mother ship, as it were, i.e. Britain. But he knew how the mood was, and rather than vote against it, he absented himself from the meeting. And he didn't vote, so the vote would be unanimous. But the story goes that he was a great believer in democracy and the majority vote. So when it came to signing the Declaration, he said, okay, I didn't agree with it, but I'm going to sign it. And his name appears with Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Samuel Adams, John Hancock's huge signature. Right next to it is Robert Morris, your sixth great-grandfather.
Those are some of your family homes, right? Or your...
That's where when I was telling Jessica about the children who died, that's the house. Now, I took that picture 7 years ago, and it's all in derelict, obviously. Oh yeah,
And then
I have one more family claim to fame. is that is my fourth great-grandfather's brother, so like a great-great-great-great uncle, Archibald MacDonald. Now he immigrated, moved over to the US and became a fur trapper in what they called the Pacific Northwest, up in Washington, Oregon, that area. And he was a pretty high up guy, and he married a princess of the Chinook Indian tribe, Princess Raven, and that's a portrait of them. Unfortunately, the sad part of the story is that they had a child after a year's marriage, and she died in childbirth.
Aww.
I know. But then he went on and married someone else. But the son they had was called Ranald MacDonald, not Ronald, but Ranald MacDonald. But Ranald became a very famous guy. He was an adventurer, and he went to Japan specifically when Japan was closed to outsiders. And at one point, he taught the shogun rulers how to speak English. And it became, in fact, both father and son have their own Wikipedia page. So, pretty interesting stuff. Can I throw it back at you and ask how you felt finding out all the stuff that I found out?
One of my favorite things that you uncovered, and it actually has a little to do with Jessica Dunham's history, was that you somehow connected my family with John Proctor, who was depicted in the Arthur Miller play The Crucible, and depicted in the movie by Daniel Day-Lewis.
He was your 9th great-grandfather.
I mean, it's a tragic story, and yeah, he is. He's my 9th great-grandfather. How you remember that, I do not know.
Yeah. But you, of course, had a very, again, this is a part of American history I love, is the whole Mormon church and evolution of the Mormon church. I love it. I've actually written about this before.
Really?
I mean, and mainly because Scots were one of the biggest contingents, if you like. I mean, the Scottish Mormon immigration was tens of thousands strong. It was one of the most fertile grounds for missionaries.
Wow.
Mainly because Scotland was a very industrial country. It had this, terrible, grim factories. People would get paid nothing. They had terrible working conditions. They would go home to a house with no sanitation, with no running water. It was awful. Somebody would come along and say, "Come across to the US, come across and join our church. We'll give you a whole new world." And off they went. And not only that, we'll pay half the fare. That was very much an offer. Your people were in at the very start. They were helping to build temples in places like Ohio and Illinois before the church ever got to Utah. You had several ancestors who were married to several wives. In particular, one guy who, by the way, I don't know if you know this guy. This is him here. He's called Draper.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
called William Draper. And one of the largest cities in Utah is called Draper, Utah, after him or his family.
Wow.
But he had 7 wives, and the 7 wives produced 52 children. Now, that was
sounds very busy.
From all these, every one of these 52 children are in your direct family tree because they're all his. Even though the mother might not have been your direct lineal ancestor, every one of the kids. So if you start multiplying this to cousins and second cousins, you have thousands of cousins.
Odds are we're related.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask you, before we wrap up here,
Ah. Oh, you did
Remember this street?
Yes.
There's
Yes.
a connection between your family and my distant family before Mormons.
Yeah, but you were connected to a family called Brisbane. A guy from Scotland called Sir Thomas MacDougall Brisbane, and he founded Brisbane, Australia, and the state of Queensland. He was the guy after which Brisbane, Australia is named. There's a town in Scotland called Largs, which is roughly where it came from. This is Brisbane Road. There is Brisbane Glen. There is the Brisbane Queen Gala Week. Brisbane everything. And I showed you this picture for one good reason. This is Brisbane Road. And this house up here, these two windows, there's two upstairs windows there, were once my family home. I lived there. That is my hometown. And I lived in Brisbane Road.
Incredible.
I was about maybe 7 or 8 or 9 years old. I remember it well. It's a beautiful old red brick building. So yeah, so you have a connection with Jessica and probably a connection with me too in a different way.
It's all those cousins, I tell you.